the different colors here, the gray one means that you have actually selected that item in the list, and the blue means, well, because you selected that item, all the rest of this stuff you're going to need too, and it kind of figures that out for you. I could still go, as you'll see, I could still go and select these things manually, but there's not really any reason to. You really just want to select the main things that you want out of this. So let's go through some of these. So CCK, these are the 4 fields, but look, it already grabbed them, so I'm not going to bother. Dependencies. This is a whole list of every module that you have enabled on your site. So if you wanted to enforce some other dependencies that it didn't pick up on, you could do that here. Some of these are already here. You'll see here, views and stuff. What I'm going to do on here, just for demonstration's sake, is I'm going to enable Views UI, just so that you can, we'll be able to see the view as it comes back in.
So that means you're saying I want a configuration of Views UI.
No, Views UI isn't really any configuration. It's just the user interface for views. So it's not a dependency because you don't really need the Views UI to be enabled when you have some views on your site. The UI is just for editing and configuring it. So that's why it wasn't selected. And there's not really any configuration for Views UI. I'm just saying for this, I want that module to be required when I enable this module. So when you go to the modules page, and you see like this module requires, the Path Auto module requires token. You need token in order to enable it, otherwise it won't even let you enable the Path Auto module. This is the same thing. This list of dependencies is going to get longer though, as you add more stuff. It just means that what you're creating here is a module with all kinds of dependencies. At least features, because you wouldn't be able to do anything with it without features. So I'm going to select the Views UI. Image cache presets, it has those too, but look, it already grabbed them, so I'm not going to bother. Menu, so this is kind of interesting. It'll actually, if you created a special menu with a special set of menu links, you could actually save that menu, and it will save that menu as exported in your code. So if you created your own custom menu with all the clicking and selecting that you would do for creating your own menu, you could export that too. I didn't create any here, so I'm not going to. And then also here's the menu link. So if you wanted to save a particular menu link, this is your whole menu structure here, and you could select individual menu links to export.
If you chose a menu link and it's part of, if it's in a menu, will that automatically make that dependent as well?
No, I think what it'll do, I'm not positive, I haven't tried it, but I think what it'll do is just drop it in the default spot, which is your navigation menu. Because it'll just say, oh, there's no menu associated with this. I'm going to find some place to put it. I'll put it in navigation, because that's where, just by default, it always puts stuff, right? Yeah. Okay. Content types, we covered that one. Taxonomy. So this is fun. I created a taxonomy vocabulary called product categories, so I'm going to select that. And permissions, and roles. So if I created extra roles, which I did, the editor role and the reviewer role, I'm going to select those.
So, don't we have to select the extra ones?
Right. I mean, Drupal's going to have anonymous and authenticated user anyway.
Yeah.
You never. Don't select more than you need to. That's kind of a rule of thumb around here. Know what you want to grab. I mean, you can always, like the dependencies, you can always enable that module later. I didn't need to select the Views UI. In fact, normally you wouldn't even really want to, because on a production site, you may not want to have Views UI enabled on the production site anyway, because it slows down your site. So that was probably a bad tactic, but I just did it for demonstration's sake. Yeah?
So if you already have an editor role in the one that you're moving it to, does it add to that role, or does it write over it?
It will probably not do anything and recognize the one that you already has as an override. So when you create the code, what Features does, and what Features does is Features doesn't push these changes into your database. What Features does is it looks to the code first, it looks to the code and says, here's all this stuff, and it kind of does some magic to a kind of snapshot what that is. And then it looks at your database and say, do they have anything equivalent there? Oh, that view is in the database and it's in code. I'm going to use the database one. So if you have if you have a role in the database and you have a role in code, then they're named the same thing. It'll probably just say, oh, that's the same thing. You know, it's in the database, so that we'll just look at that one. Yeah, and permissions, kind of the same thing. Does that make sense? Did I answer your question? Okay. Test it, though. That's what staging's all about. Some of these modules and modules kind of, they make themselves feature compatible in different ways sometimes. So when they release their stuff, it might function just a little bit differently than what you might expect. So this is what testing's all about. But as we'll see, this is nice to be able to get all this code out of here. Okay, permissions, kind of the same thing. This is your whole list of permission items. So if you have set, you know, who you want to, so here's my review content. You know, if I set these permissions and I want to make sure to grab the permissions that I set for the editor and the reviewer, and actually this will even save the authenticated user and anonymous user role permissions as well for any of these permission types. So there's delete a review content, create a review content, delete own review content, delete any review content, edit any, okay, review content, okay. So now it'll save all those things too, and you saw them start building right here. Roles we saw and views we saw. Okay, StrongArm. StrongArm is another module that was created by Development Seed, and they made it specifically to work with views. Technically, I would work with features. Technically, I don't think you need features in order to run StrongArm, but normally the two kind of go hand in hand. If you've ever looked at the database or used the devel module, you might recognize this as your list of variables. So Drupal has a default variables, or a variables table that it stores all kinds of stuff that modules decide to store. If they decide, okay, I don't need to store this in its own table in the database, it's too simple, I'm just going to create a variable and I'm going to have Drupal store it for me. It's just easier that way. And in the code, it's really easy to create new variables and delete the variables and recover the variables. So you don't have to like go and create a new database or a new table. Yeah.
Does this relate to the variable table?
Yes, the variable table in Drupal. Yeah. So you'll see these are all of the variables that different modules have set based on the configuration. So this is really handy. In fact, if you notice that a lot of these have already been selected. See, a lot of the comment stuff that has to do with the review, already picked that up. The node options for the review, yeah, mostly it's just this comment stuff, but then the node options. So that's like the edit screen of your content type. That's what that is. It doesn't actually store that in its own table. It's actually stored here. What I did with this one, though, for my demo here, is that I actually enabled 5-star and created a bunch of 5-star settings. So I'm going to go through and enable all of the 5-star for the review. The review is the content type name that I created. Okay. And any others? Whatever. Okay. Does that make sense? I mean, I used features for a long time before I figured out StrongArm, and then once I saw it, I was like, wait a minute, this is really cool. In fact, what this means is that a lot of modules that are very, very simple, they might just have features integration already just because all they store their settings in is in the variables table, you know? So you might find that just by having StrongArm allows you to have a whole ton of features integration that the original module developer never even bothered to enter.
So is this basically a UI for dealing with the variable table?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this will export that configuration
Okay.
into code, and you'll be able to see what it is.
Okay.
So I think that's good. Does this look like a nice module? It looks like a nice module. So we're going to download it.
What if you forget like a pivotal part of this package that you're putting together?
You better remember at some point. I mean, if you're in your development environment, you're not going to overwrite what you already have. You're not going to do what I'm going to do, which is erase the whole database and then install this feature. You're going to you're doing your development within your development environment. You're exporting your feature, and then you're using that feature on maybe a brand new site just to see what's there, right?
Yeah, I get it. It's just like as I can picture developers being in an ongoing environment, and you know it's late at night. Fix something and they made it, and I think they forgot to check box. what are the pieces that need to go in it. or
Right,
not.
they
Or
might
if
forget,
you
well,
just
then that
configure
features,
it.
or that functionality is just not there. You know, that view never shows up. Or it defaults back to, if it's a strong arm variable, then it just defaults back to whatever the default was in Drupal.
Okay.
And it's
Um,
going to do its best job to find everything that's dependent.
Right, if it does its best job, as you saw, all that blue stuff was stuff that it already found because it knew that you needed it. Know also that if you have when you have one installed, when you have a feature installed, and you go in and you make changes to it, it'll tell you that it's overridden, but also it'll say, okay, I want to recreate it, and you don't have to go through and recheck everything again.
Okay.
So it knows what you already had, and it'll use that as kind of your starting point. And you say, oh yeah, I also enabled this module, and so I want to select these ones too. So you go select extra checkboxes, but you'll then export it. You can recreate it after that.
Well, along those lines, what would be the harm of just checking everything?
Well, you can get conflictions. You might have multiple features on your site, and you wouldn't want to have two features that try to get the exact same variable or the exact same setting because they'll conflict with each other. And the features module will complain about that. So that's a good reason. I would say there's not really much reason to. And a lot of this stuff is like just default Drupal behavior anyway. What you're trying to do with this is just try to build a piece of your site that you want to move forward, right? Because like this won't have any content in it or anything. It's just kind of the shell that you're creating. You're going to create a pretty big module, and a lot of that stuff is stuff that you don't really need to pay attention to. So why? I just don't see a reason to. So what we're going to do here is we said download feature. This created a nice little tarball for us, and I'm just going to save the file.